This is a very special podcast. We are going to be reading a section from Terry Crew's book, Tough, My Journey to True Power. The first thing that I'm going to say is that I enjoy learning from other genders and other ethnicities, and this is not something that is promoted by the various cultures in the world that suffer from their own ethnocentric nature. We should be learning from each other, especially in this day and age of the internet, of the era of books where you don't even have to pay for a book. You can go down to the library like I did, not even pay a dime, and read a book, a good book, over the course of a day and have your mind blown, right? You have so many opportunities to evolve your soul right now, but there are many people in your midst that are in the mainstream media and the alternative media that are trying to disrupt your consciousness deliberately and knowingly. So the first thing that I'm going to say is that there's a lot of people in this culture that point their finger at others and say that others are evil, that others are a threat, that others are terrorists, when in their own lives they have never even been assaulted or physically harmed by these individuals. But even if they are physically harmed or punched in the head, that doesn't mean that they have the right to become racist to all people of a certain demographic. Just because I was punched in the face 7 to 10 times by Black Americans in Portland, Oregon, not in Colorado, not in the other places that I've traveled to, but in Portland, in high school, in middle school, and in the streets. Does that mean that I think that all Black people are like that? Absolutely not. I told you before that there is a programming in certain people. They may analyze certain people as perhaps white or Arabic, and because of their programming, because of what's on social media, because of their own upbringing, because of their own demons as an individual or as a group, they may decide that certain people deserve to get their ass kicked. But that does not mean that everybody is like that. Just because there are some terrorists out there that claim that they are members of certain religions, although they aren't really true Muslims, that does not mean that all Muslims are like that. There are Sufi Muslims, there are Sikhs, there are those that are not Muslim at all, but maybe Middle Eastern, but they are still being hated because of the events of 9/11. And so we also look at the hatred towards some white people. Just because there are neo-Nazis, and sometimes in government and the military, does not mean that all white people are responsible for institutional white supremacy, which does exist and has existed for a very long time. And so my encouragement is for people to think outside the box of the racial programs. And in reality, are you really your race? Final thoughts before we start reading. Are you really your race? Do you really believe that? Or are you a spirit that is animating this world of physicality, that is trapped in the illusions of separation? Think about these things. I'm going to read from this book, and after producing 2 pretty intense podcasts, I am going to bring you some additional spiritual perspectives and information following this podcast. So stay tuned, because there's a lot of although diversity gets a bad rap, yes, there is a diverse level of content and intellect that you get from Alex Ansary. Let's begin. Page 239. Let me get my reading voice on. The library called and said, "Alex, can you please bring our book back? You've had it for a while." So, okay, you'll get your book back tomorrow. But today is Sunday, right? And even though I don't feel welcome at these local churches with the current situation in Israel and Gaza, because I did go to churches, folks, a month ago. I went to 5 churches in a single day, and it was not a good vibe. But that doesn't mean that I can't serve God in my own way by serving you and attempting to help you evolve. I don't have to be a pastor at a church. I don't have to have my own building. I don't even have to have a lot of money. But God has given me the ability to speak right now. My voice has not been taken away like Val Kilmer's voice was taken away as he developed throat cancer. I read his book as well. God has blessed me with health and life. And so even though I may not live forever and there may be danger ahead, I feel a calling from God to help you see, for those with the eyes to see and ears to hear, because we have got to get outside these boxes of hatred that are being promoted in our direction in a pretty intense way at this time. Okay, let's get to it. As the lockdown entered its third month on May 26th, after finishing up a Zoom interview with The View to promote the season 15 premiere of America's Got Talent, I clicked over to surf the web. With reality on lockdown, the internet, and social media in particular, had become my reality. It seems that was true for all of us. Practically every hour on the hour, I would surf the web, looking for updates on when the lockdowns would be over. That's what I was doing when I came across a New York Times article about the death of yet another unarmed black man in police custody. The headline read, "Bystander videos of George Floyd and others are policing the police." The article itself went on to highlight the discrepancies between the police report and actual cell phone footage of the man's death by the innocent bystanders. The police had claimed that Floyd had died on his way to the hospital. The videos told a different, more accurate story. I read the article. I didn't watch the video. As more and more of those videos have gone viral in recent years, I've made a practice of avoiding them. While I understand the necessity of people seeing them, I usually can't bring myself to do it. This time, however, it seemed there was no escaping it. The video followed me on Twitter and then onto TikTok, popping up everywhere I went, and finally relented and clicked play. Folks, I'm going to pause and tell you something and then go back and try not to stop. I just want to tell you something before we continue. There was a monster solar flare on the 29th of May, around the time of the George Floyd protests. And so I do believe that the civil unrest vibrations, the civil unrest activity, the violence, the attacks on the federal building in Portland, Oregon that went on for months, this was all in relation to the monster solar flare. It absolutely affected those people. The other next thing I'm going to say is I don't watch footage of war crimes or reports of them regarding Afghanistan and Iraq because it's too hard for me to watch. I make reference of them to you, but it's very traumatic for me to keep coming across that content. One day I would like to work with a team of individuals and make a documentary about that material, right? But I would prefer not to do it alone because it's very heartbreaking. And I want to see others step up to the plate. So let me continue. What I saw shocked me to my core. A police officer kneeling with his full weight on George Floyd's neck as he moaned and cried out, "I can't breathe." Bystanders were pleading with the officer to let him up, but the officer just stayed there until the man eventually grew quiet. When it was over, it hit me that I just watched a man die, a big black man who looked a lot like me. George Floyd was, at that point, the newest in a long and growing list of names with which America had become all too familiar. Michael Brown, Tamir Rice, Freddie Gray, Eric Garner, Philando Castile, Sandra Bland, Alton Sterling, Breonna Taylor. Tension and anger were building. In that moment, I felt the same way I'd felt sitting on the set of Brooklyn Nine-Nine, reading all the Harvey Weinstein stories. I felt I needed to say something. I went over to my Instagram page and shared some of my own experiences of being on the business end of a jumpy police officer's gun. I could have been George Floyd, I said, hoping to help people understand how common these police encounters are. The reaction was beyond supportive. Don Lemon had me on CNN to discuss what I'd said, and it felt like the whole world was nodding along, understanding what I and thousands of others were going online to say. As the video of George Floyd's death continued to go viral, the outpouring of public opinion remained overwhelmingly positive. The vast majority of people pouring into the streets and posting online merely wanted to pay tribute to the man who'd been killed, see that justice was done for the crime, and see reforms put in place to make sure that this tragedy stops unfolding again and again, all of which was wonderful to see. All at the same time, I couldn't help but feel a darker element starting to rise, like a weed growing among flowers, a disturbing undertow in the tidal wave of emotion that was sweeping over the country. It wasn't any one tweet or any one Facebook post that set me off, just the general tone of so much of the discourse. People had every right to be angry, but this was a very different kind of rage. What I saw was a broad brush, categorically demonization and dehumanization of white people. It was white people this and white people that, Phrases like white supremacy and white privilege were being thrown around in ways far beyond their intended definitions, making it sound as if whiteness were some sort of original sin, an inherent defect that made every white person complicit in Floyd's murder. It made me feel, quite honestly, like I was back in the BET cafeteria, where black people were so angry, so eager for payback, that they lost all perspective on what was right, just, and humane. Folks, I got to stop one more time and give you another brief commentary. It was very painful to see massive mobs of violent people screaming, "Stop killing black people," and burning down buildings where they never once said, "Stop killing Afghans." They never once showed their true anti-racist nature and belief that truly all lives matter. That was very painful for me to see, having experienced what I've experienced and what I've researched regarding these countries. And so I don't look at the woke movement as loving at all, and they do not care about my plight. And if somebody wants to correct me and step forward and say, "We do care about your plight," right, then do so. But we all know that those folks are not listening to these podcasts. All the sweeping generalizations about white people disturb me. First of all, I knew that they were just not true. Second of all, once you start demonizing white people and whiteness, you're setting yourself up as judge and jury of any black person you deem to be too white and therefore insufficiently black. I've been down that road. It's where black people run my wife out of church and send hate mail to my children. It's not a good place to be. But even more important than that is the fact that dehumanizing white people is dehumanizing to black people. The first step is losing our own humanity, is dehumanizing others, because it's the justification we use to trespass against them. In order to maintain the slave economy of the South, America had to convince itself that black people were less than human. They cultivated a whole mythology about the black man's base instincts and animal nature in order to justify keeping millions of people in bondage. Now, doesn't that sound familiar to another demographic right now that I've talked to you about? By creating and investing themselves in that mythology, by failing to recognize the humanity of black people, the white slaveholders of the South turned themselves into moral monsters. The opposite of dehumanization is empathy, recognition. Anytime we recognize and emphasize with the humanity of the person sitting across from us, we're less likely to use our power to inflict harm on them. But the moment we start to see them as different from and less than us, the door is open for us to commit to any manner of crime against them, from everyday disrespect up to and including lynching and genocide. By dehumanizing others, we start to lose our own moral compass, our own goodness, thus our own humanity. I know it's true because I'm a textbook example. Being a toxic, male, chauvinist, addicted to pornography, I saw my wife and other women as objects, which gave rise to my controlling, abusive temper. As the child of an abusive home, for a long time, I saw Big Terry not as the broken, damaged person he was, but as an evil monster to be defeated, which ended up with my beating my own father bloody at Christmas, one of the lowest rock bottom points of my life. I've had to learn how to have empathy, and it's hard. I have to practice at it every day, and I still fail all the time. Sitting in my house under lockdown, looking out on the world through the distorted lens of Twitter and Instagram, I felt like our empathy for each other was slipping away. And I'm going to give some other commentary. I was basically having my own social isolation, living off the grid for years. And so when other people went through their own lockdown, even though I didn't support the lockdowns, I knew that I was dealing with a society that had not really been oppressed yet, like some of us, that have already been driven out into the woods, out into the desert, excommunicated by the so-called truth movement and the so-called woke movement. I already knew what it was like to live in social isolation, and I did not let it radicalize me. I let it encourage me to become a far more spiritual person, to become more invested in the afterlife. And so the ways that others responded to the lockdowns was highly unconscious. Even if the lockdowns were unconscious, they just spent a bit more time on their spirituality and meditation than getting angry and causing problems for people. And we're talking about on the left and the right. There was a lot of unconscious, rude, violent behavior on both sides that we saw during the lockdowns. Going back to the book. What was especially disturbing was the heightened effect that social media was having. When I was in college, the same toxic elements of black militants were already there, the demonization of white people as blue-eyed devils, and the ridiculous notions of melanin making black people superior somehow. That's a very important statement that he's making, because I've come across that thinking as well. But those ideas could only go so far outside the bubble of the black fraternity. You just can't sit around and marginalize and hate white people all the time. You were an extreme minority on campus. At the end of the day, you had to go out and interact with white professors and white classmates, and as much as some of them might piss you off, you had to learn how to get along and empathize, and relate to others. A lot of the militants was performance as well. You had to do it for the group so that no one would come down on you for not supporting the cause. And I'm just going to pause right here. In modern day America, in the post-woke movement, it has become socially acceptable for angry black people to give death threats to public officials. When I was watching Eli's channel in Portland, Oregon, there was an angry black woman who was wearing a militant Black Power outfit, who said in her speech that we are coming after you in basically a death threat sort of way. And she was able to get away with it because that type of anger is being justified by so many people in today's society. And there's many more examples I can give you, but I'm going to go back to the book. But what I'm saying is, if I was to say that to Ted Wheeler, it would not be accepted. It would not be excused. And so we shouldn't be excusing the death threats and the angry rhetoric that we sometimes see from these individuals. Despite their oppression and despite their anger, they are not the only people that have faced oppression. Guys would put on the black beret and the dashiki and shout, "Man, fuck white people." But then once the show was over, they drop the act and go home with their white friends and white girlfriends, and in some cases, their white family members. You could be as militant as you wanted, and I went through that phase as well. But at some point, you have to reconcile your ideology with the demands of reality. And I'm going to pause. I've seen white people say bad things about white people, and crazy ass things like, if somebody has a nice car or a nice house, that they're a supremacist or something. Like this is from a fake former friend who I knew off the grid in Colorado. And I was thinking to myself, what a stupid thing to say. And so did somebody in the comment section. They're like, what did I just hear? Because we did a brief interview for my channel. I can't believe he said that. That would be an example of somebody fronting, but in reality, that individual is so tribalist and prefers his own kind over being my friend. So everything that dude was saying was so full of crap. He needs to look at his own side of the street instead of say stupid shit like that. Now we're on page 243. Now, thanks to social media, when people are online, they never have to leave their bubbles, or what I've been telling you, the algorithms that will custom tailor certain content just to you and your own group and your own demographic and your own box that they have put you in. So if you're into conspiracy theory, you're going to get lots of Nazism, flat earth, pro-Trump, pro-Putin. Right? Do you understand? Can you hear me now? If you operate outside of that and you're in left, you're going to get left-tailored content. And if you're on the far right, again, you're going to be pulled into certain fake conspiracy news and demonization of foreign people. You literally, if you want the truth, you can't just stay in a little bubble in which algorithms are manipulating you. Now, thanks to social media, when people are online, they never have to leave their bubbles, and everyone is performing all the time, a phenomena exacerbated by the isolation brought on by the pandemic. On Facebook and Twitter, people live in these echo chambers where they not only can never drop the act, but have to constantly dial up the volume to prove that they're bona fides to anyone who is watching, and everyone is watching. Even private thought has become a public utterance. As that has happened, the nuance and ambivalence of private reflection and interpersonal dialogue has vanished from the conversation. Every statement has become more strident, more militant, more judgmental, and more vicious. And, another comment from me, I chose to get offline completely during that period in which everybody was jumping online, right? As all these humans were jumping online with their toxic psychic energy and thoughts, I was getting offline. I was going in the opposite direction of the herd. I understood what was happening on a visceral level because I'd grown up in it. The screaming mobs on Twitter reminded me of the congregation of the great Holy Temple Church of God in Christ, whipped up into a self-righteous frenzy by Elder Jones. In that church, everybody was watching everybody, passing judgment on every sin, and denouncing all the heathen non-believers outside who were surely going to hell. My mother passed judgment on everyone for their sins because she was so afraid that she'd get caught out for her own. Being holier than thou was the smokescreen that kept other people from opening her closet door and finding all those Harlequin romance novels inside. Now that same dynamic was playing out in the digital public square 24/7, replicating all the worst aspects of being trapped inside a cult. Any culture can become a cult. I would also say families too. No matter how pure and noble its intentions. The words of Jesus Christ contain not one passage about being judgmental and cruel to your fellow man. In fact, everything he said was the opposite. Yet the greater Holy Temple Church of God in Christ exists, sowing judgment and cruelty in Jesus' name. It's a phenomena that transcends any one ideology. From Donald Trump's MAGA hordes to Bernie Sanders' Bernie Bros to the fanboys of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, every group is out there in their Twitter bubble, led by their loudest and angriest adherents. Everyone in the bubble who likes and retweets the popular prevailing sentiment gets showered with likes and retweets of their own. Anyone who pushes back against that sentiment invites a torrent of verbal abuse. By gifts we make slaves, and by whips we make dogs. There's nothing new under the sun. And what I'm going to add here briefly is that many churches are so judgmental towards single mothers that, quote, have what they call bastard children, so on and so forth, especially if it's a mixed race child. So it should be no mystery why some women were never supported by Christians and they were pushed into the arms of the New Age movement, right? That's likely what happened to my mother, going back to the book. Social media makes people cruel in the same way that religion makes my mother cruel. By the way, I just read a book about online addiction, and social media does not have empathetic people. So even though I'm sharing content on social media, it is against the nature of the social media consumer to have true empathy and compassion, when in reality they're seeking dopamine hits and entertainment. Whereas if you really want to reach someone and encourage empathy and compassion, a book might be more appropriate. Going back, social media makes people cruel in the same way that religion made my mother cruel. It made her self-righteous. She was so convinced of the rightness of her actions, or more precisely, she so desperately needed to convince herself of the rightness of her actions that she decided that she was justified in abusing others who couldn't or wouldn't follow the same rules. The same thing was true of me for a long time, because in my shame, I'd learned how to be just as judgmental and self-righteous as she was. Once I understood that, I came to realize that self-righteousness is perhaps the greatest sin of all, because it's yet another justification we give ourselves to excuse the damage we inflict. Self-righteousness is the thing that allows us to lift ourselves up in the same way that dehumanizing others allows us to lower them down. Once we allow that dynamic to take root, we've created a moral monster, and the monster is ourselves. Maybe it's true that only white people can be racist, but anyone can fall into the trap of dehumanizing others. Anyone can be so convinced of the goodness of their cause that they will excuse any action that supports it, and in the end, they will wind up no better than the abusers that they set out to destroy. Okay, and I hope you appreciate my side commentary that's adding to this, right? Because I'm not trying to take away, I'm trying to add to this. There are people on the left that say that black people can't be racist, that Latinos and others can't be racist because they don't have institutional power. Okay, let me tell you why that's wrong and a false statement. They do have institutional power if Netflix and Amazon Prime and the algorithm is promoting their plight over the plight of other ethnic people that are bombed back to the Stone Age. In fact, they have way more power and they are respected far more than people of certain bloodlines. And I've demonstrated this to you. I've spoken to you about this in detail. And so they are unintelligent. They are not smart individuals. They are not truly empathetic for the people around the world. If they say today that black people have no power and don't have a voice, they have plenty of voice. Okay, you have Black History Month on Amazon Prime. Everywhere you look, you see the promotion of black culture within corporate media. But those corporations don't really care about black people in reality. They're actually, in my opinion, creating more tensions. And I can elaborate that in other podcasts. But they're not truly helping the situation by what they're doing. By ignoring other groups and just shining the light on certain groups, there's actually an imbalance in the force. And anyone truly spiritual would understand that there's an imbalance in the force, and it's not okay. We're on page 245. All of which is to say that in the wake of George Floyd's murder, I was witnessing a number of disturbing trends that had started to bubble up online. This movement to save black lives, born of the best intentions of which I fully agree, appeared to me to be curdling into something else. After watching this unhealthy dynamic play out for the week and a half after Floyd's murder, I decided I ought to say something. There were plenty of racist trolls flaming black people right back, but it didn't seem like people were stepping in to try to bring the dialogue back to a constructive place. By the way, guys, in July of 2020 in Durango, Colorado, the right wing mobilized in Facebook groups against Black Lives Matter. And because of the destruction that certain Black Lives Matter groups were involved in Portland, Oregon, in other cities, they acted like that Black Lives Matter group in Durango was engaged in violence. And there were people spreading fake news saying that there was violent Antifa members in Durango, Colorado, when there were not. It could have been the Chinese, it could have been the Russians. But you need to know this. Just because some people might join a leftist protest doesn't mean that they're automatically planning to riot. There were certain protests, folks, in the 2020s that did not result in their cities being burned down. And so because of some of the interference on social media and trolls that may not even be in the United States, fake news was put out there, like I said, about certain groups planning to cause violence, that armed men showed up, men with brass knuckles showed up in other states, getting in the face of those protesters, treating them like they were the violent protesters in Portland or in New York or in other cities. I hope you understand this. I hope you know that these things happened. Going back to the book, there were plenty of racist trolls flaming black people right back, but it didn't seem like people were stepping in to try to bring the dialogue back to a constructive place. So I decided to give it a shot. After all, it had worked before when I jumped on Twitter and shared my thoughts and experiences in support of the Me Too movement. It had ended with victory against William Morris and my testifying before Congress. What could go wrong? So on June 7th, 2020, I tweeted out, "Defeating white supremacy without white people creates black supremacy. Equality is the truth. Like it or not, we are all in this together." I'm going to read that again. Defeating white supremacy without white people creates black supremacy. Equality is the truth. Like it or not, we are all in this together. I posted the tweet and I went out to pick up some fast food for lunch with my son. And when I got back to my computer, it was like I set the internet on fire. The phrase black supremacy was the fuse on a powder keg. It was the #1 trending topic on Twitter. And I'm just going to say this briefly. The controllers manipulate what trends on Twitter. So if they want to make white supremacy trend, if they want to make the Oath Keepers trend, if they want to make MAGA trend, if they want to make Alex Jones trend, if they want to make Elon Musk trend, they will make a trend and they will build up followings towards those groups, phrases, terms, and ideas. If they want to promote something else that's against white people, they will also do that as well. For the true controllers behind it all are creating unrest on all sides. Going back to the book. When I first tweeted out the phrase black supremacy, I did it because it just came to me as the most clear way of expressing what I was thinking, and a way to take the pervasive anti-white bigoted attitudes that I'd encountered my whole life and sum them up while staying within Twitter's limited word count. I wasn't even aware of any other context in which it had been used. Then once the backlash hit, I started digging and found, of course, that I was far from the only person to use it. Black supremacy, Martin Luther King Jr. said in 1960, is as dangerous as white supremacy, and God is not interested merely in the freedom of black people and brown people and yellow men. God is interested in the freedom of the whole human race, and in the creation of a society where all men can live together as brothers, where every man will respect the dignity and the worth of human personality, which is pretty much exactly what I meant to say. It's no surprise that Dr. King said it more eloquently than I had. It was also no surprise that the backlash came swift and hard. I received both public and private messages that I should rescind the statement or that I would be rescinded. People called me an Uncle Tom. By the way, when I protested an early version of Antifa in 2010 called the Black Bloc, I was being screamed at by someone who previously was a fan of mine because I protested the early version of Antifa, even though they've been around for a while. In Portland, they were called the Black Bloc. I was called a personality. He says, "You're not a real person, Alex. You are a personality." And those words stung because I was protesting with my megaphone their promotion of violence because a black man was killed. Just because a black man was killed does not mean that the city of Portland should be burned down. And I was the only one that did what I did. And Clyde Lewis demonized me on the air. Clyde Lewis of Ground Zero Radio demonized me on the air, and he interviewed the protesters that were in support of the property destruction because Clyde Lewis had it in for me. Fast forward to where we are now, Clyde Lewis is on the right, and he's in the Trump camp, and he's been on the Alex Jones show. He is a hypocrite. Those of you that listen to Alex Jones, those of you that listen to Clyde Lewis, you need to be aware of this hypocrisy and how they treated me back in the day. And how when I stood up against the early version of Antifa in Portland, Oregon, right? People didn't care about me, and they talked about me like I was an idiot. Although Alex Jones at the time did post, his staff did post my video, but it was later taken down. So folks, I already put myself in the streets against these folks before shit got crazy after Trump came into power. Never forget that. Terry Crews continues in his book, "My feed was filling up with pictures of clowns and coons. One prominent black performer accused me of being an enemy of the people. Another said my tweet was a capitulation to white supremacy." I got more stories to tell you, but I'm just going to keep reading. I'm having lots of flashbacks of people treating me like as if I was on the side of evil for being against what they were for. Part of the reason it's easy to get sucked into a Twitter beef is that you end up taking a ton of incoming fire, and so much of it is so much off the mark that you feel that you have to respond. In the messages I was receiving, I was being told over and over again that black supremacy could never be a problem because black people are only 13% of the U.S. population, and we hold no, quote, institutional power. And I just told you how I don't agree with that statement. First of all, as Dr. King knew, any kind of supremacy is a belief system. It's not about how much power you have in the moment. It's about the reasons you have for seeking power. And what would you do with power if you got it? That's right. Would you care about my life? Are you out there marching for George Floyd because you wanted to reconcile and unite everyone in a country built on dignity and respect and equality? Or are you out there filled with self-righteous rage because you believe deep down that white people are morally defective and non-white people are in some way superior? And I'm just going to add this in. During the anti-war days in Portland, Oregon, in which we would protest against the invasions of Iraq, although people didn't care about Afghanistan, but they were told it was okay to march against the invasion of Iraq, there were hardly any black people in attendance, and I knew that that was wrong, that this involved them, that we were dealing with a non-white group of people that are being harmed by the military-industrial complex, so that it did, in fact, involve white people and black people, especially black people. Of course, they got drones over your cities now. They have computers taking over your society now. So it does involve you folks, because they unleashed the machines on the third world people, and now they're going to release the machines on you. They already are with the algorithms. This is just the beginning. You know the robots are coming next. And so for black people to not think that the anti-war movement was something that they should involve themselves in, that was a mistake on their part, to think that they would not be affected by the machines of the future. We're all affected, folks, when people are basically neutralized by the terminators of the world through either drone attacks, laser weapons, or others, right? You wouldn't want it done to you, would you? Right? So why would we remain silent about the millions of victims of war unless we were already pre-programmed to see them as less than human? Think about this. And ask yourself, why don't you hear about the plight of these people around the world in the alternative media if they're trying to save our country so much, if they're such great proponents of freedom and liberty? Then why are they so silent about these genocides? Going back to the book. Reading the statement again. Are you out there marching for George Floyd because you want to reconcile and unite everyone in a country built on dignity and respect and equality? Or are you out there filled with self-righteous rage because you believe deep down that white people are morally defective and non-white people are in some way superior? The other thing that I need to add is that many black people will still view Arabic people and Afghan people as white, even though they are not treated as white by white people. So many Arabs, Afghanis, Middle Eastern people can be subjected to anti-white violence by black thugs in the modern day and age. They're not seen really as minorities. As to the point that black people have no institutional power, that's just not true. And it's astounding to me that someone would make that claim. 50 years after Stockley, Kamachal raised his fist on a march in Mississippi, defiantly calling on black people to assert their power. Why would black people try to rally themselves, disclaiming the considerable power that we already have? Do black people have as much power as white people? Of course not. We're a small minority of the population. Do black people have as much power as we should? Of course not. The legacy of slavery and segregation has left us with vast disparities that remain to be overcome. But over the last 10 to 15 years, black people elected a black president. Black voters in South Carolina single-handedly determined the course of the 2020 primary, making Joe Biden the party's nominee. Despite the wealth gap that persists, black households generate billions of dollars in personal income every year. Every university and Fortune 500 company in America is out there tap dancing as fast as it can to prove how diverse it can be. As I just told you, Netflix, Tubi, the internet algorithm. YouTube back in the day had a Creators for Change thing going on where they highlighted black voices while they also pushed white supremacy, while they also pushed Nazism and anti-themism. We have political power, economic power, and cultural power. And all history has shown time and time again, any group of people is just as capable of abusing its own power as anyone else. Black people can use our own power responsibly to pursue justice for ourselves and reconciliation for all, or we can abuse it in ways that dehumanize others and further divide the country. And yet, for some reason, the world still insists on seeing black people as powerless. And I see the promotion of mixed race relationships constantly, the black male with the white female. When have you ever seen people say that it's okay for someone like my father to be with someone like my mother? You know in your heart that that is taboo in our society. One person that I won't name actually trolled me on my channel and said, we need to keep the Muslim men away from the white women. And I understand where she's coming from with her ties to Alex Jones, having worked for Alex Jones directly, realizing that she's brainwashed by Alex Jones. But why would she watch my channel for over 10 years and say that to me, being that I'm a product of that? Is she trying to harm me emotionally, or is she totally naive and ignorant? And so people of my ethnic background, we're considered taboo, the form of life that should not be. But when it comes to blacks and whites, having a mixed race child or creating an Andrew Tate, if you will, that's okay. And so while they're screaming about all this racism, it's actually totally socially acceptable in this society, in many circles, to be half black, half white. But if you're in my shoes, right, you live a different life, guaranteed. Unless, of course, you're never going to talk about the New World Order. You're never going to talk about 9/11, and you're never going to talk about the victims of war, and you never talk about your ethnicity. So basically someone like Zoe Ansary that has 11 million likes on TikTok. Zoe Ansary, who won't talk about her background, who can fit into the white society because she passes for totally white and she's gorgeous, she won't have the same lived experience as her distant relative, Alex Ansary. Do you see what I see? Do you understand? When you put yourself out there and you push back against the lies, the devil of this world, the Eye of Sauron, pushes back with his minions. Going back to the book. And yet, for some reason, the world still insists on seeing black people as powerless. When this whole back and forth was going on, I was getting tweets, not just from black people, but also from white people. All these 18 and 19-year-old super woke white kids telling me how powerless I am, that I am a victim of white supremacy, and that I needed to do the work so that I can understand the ways in which whiteness is controlling me. But it's not. It used to, certainly. For the longest time, I was controlled, not just by racism, but by my rage and my shame and everything else. I saw myself as nothing but a victim, coming and going. I was a victim of my parents' abuse, a victim of my coach's abuse, a victim of all the white directors and producers who wanted to cast me only as criminals and gangsters. I could blame everyone else for every problem in my life, and I did. I could luxuriate in victimhood forever, and I did. There were days it felt as good as a warm bubble bath. But then come the downside of it, because seeing yourself as a victim means you see yourself as powerless. And the impotence of being powerless leaves you with nothing but rage. I understood that rage all too well. I lived it for most of my life, which is why I recognized it in so many of the voices that I saw crying out on Twitter in the wake of George Floyd. And I'm going to pause here. I don't have a blind rage towards white supremacy or black supremacy or anything else. But I have the assertive nature growing within me to push back against the unconscious behaviors. I had a girlfriend, although we weren't physical, but we dated briefly in 2010. And I even took her to meet Richard at the Survival Center, where I made a video about his bunker and promoted his bunker building business. Underground bunkers for 70 grand, probably 100 grand now. And so even though, right, I thought we were developing some sort of a friendship because I was promoting Ron Paul at the time, and Ron Paul was being called a racist by Rachel Maddow on MSNBC because of his newsletters. And I don't think necessarily Ron Paul is an angel for certain reasons, but I did support him because he believed in pulling the troops out of Afghanistan and Iraq. And there were other policies of Ron Paul that were positive. And Ron Paul people, like John, who's listening, and others, but John's the only person from the Ron Paul groups that I was involved in, who is still my friend to this day. There may be others that are listening, but I don't know that they're friends. John has been somewhat of a friend and visited me in Colorado several times. Okay? I never had any friends from the Obama crowd. I never had any friends from the Bush crowd. I had a friend from the Ron Paul crowd because we were against the wars overseas. And so when this white woman basically throws me away, calling me a racist, talking to me like I'm a white supremacist when I'm not even fully white, when I'm pushing back against the wars, that hurt my feelings. But I knew that she was being brainwashed by the media because Ron Paul did far more good than bad. I don't know about those newsletters. I didn't read those newsletters. That was back in the day. So that wasn't a good thing if there were racist things in those newsletters. But Ron Paul did a lot of good. And you can't see Obama, and you can't see Bush, and you can't see other candidates. You can't see many others saying the things that Ron Paul said. Ron Paul said, would you like it if your country and your state was invaded by Chinese and Russian troops? How would you feel? Who else has talked like that? Ron Paul gave that speech. Going back to the book. My understanding of the power that I had started to change only after D-Day with Rebecca, but it finally completely turned around thanks to Adam Vennet. For the year I spent sitting around frustrated watching my work opportunities dry up and waiting for William Morris to do something, I was 100% the victim in the situation. Then, inspired by the courage of the women who stood up to Harvey Weinstein, once I went public about my assault, I never once felt like a victim again. Even sitting across from Ari Emanuel, even being threatened by one of the most powerful men in Hollywood, I never saw myself as powerless. No, 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 I said. I'm the one driving this train. I have the power here. I am the one in control of how I handle this situation. And because I decided to be, I was. The same thing was true in the wake of George Floyd's murder. In that moment, black people wielded a tremendous amount of power. The eyes of the whole world were upon us. Our words were the top trending subjects on every social media platform in the country. Books about race were flying off the shelves and filling up virtually every last slot on the New York Times bestseller list. We were given a gigantic megaphone. So it was important that we stopped and asked ourselves, what do we want to say? And taken a brief pause. As I told you, Black Lives Matter in New York and other places is supporting the Palestinians. When have they supported the other ethnic groups in the Middle East? Never. The media tried to get Black Lives Matter to stand up for Asian lives, and so they had a few of the individuals that they had influence over go around with a megaphone saying, Asian lives matter, Black lives matter, Asian lives matter, Black lives matter. And they filmed a guy saying that, and they put him on NBC News. But the truth is, the vast majority of Black Lives Matter are not running around saying Asian lives matter. That is not true. They falsely have portrayed some of these leaders of Black Lives Matter of caring about all the various ethnic groups. That is not true. As Viktor Frankl wrote, in that moment, we were in control of how we used our power to respond to a gross injustice. Would we abuse that power, or would we use it responsibly in a way that moved the country forward and not back? Every few minutes, I was getting another tweet that indicated the former and not the latter. The one response that really said it all was from a black writer for The Root and other publications. She said, "You are truly worthless to us. White people can have you, especially since you love doing their work for them." It was the kind of response that only proved everything that I was saying was right. We were in danger of destroying a potential moment of unity, reconciliation, and progress by turning it into a bitter, zero-sum game of black against white. And here is this woman's reply, boiling down the issue down to exactly that. If you're not with us, you're with them. And like I said, that former woman that I dated, she blocked me on Facebook, defriended me, right? Simply because I cared about the wars overseas and gave credit to a man that opposed that. And she wanted to buy what the mainstream media told her. Upstairs in the bedroom, Rebecca was following along on her phone. I asked her what she thought I should do, and she said she was in the same place that I was. She'd experienced the bigotry of black people even more than I have after facing her own mortality just a few weeks before. She didn't have time for anything other than blunt honesty and truth. Terry, she said, do not back down. You are doing a good thing. So I didn't back down. The next day, I followed my Black Supremacy tweet with this one. Please know that everything I've said comes from a spirit of love and reconciliation for the black community first, then the world as a whole, in hopes to see a better future for black people. I believe it is important that we not suffer from groupthink, and we keep minds of our own and be allowed to ask difficult questions to each other. I believe this dialogue is important as we get through this trauma together. I love you. And I followed that one with this one. If you are a child of God, you are my brother and sister. I have family of every race, creed, and ideology. We must ensure that Black Lives Matter does not morph into Black Lives Better. Of course, Black Lives Better lit even a bigger powder keg than Black Supremacy had, and from there, the backlash only continued. The clown and coon images kept flooding in. The rapper Rick Ross even put a line about me in one of his singles saying, Terry Crews is a coon who is basically bought. This is from a man who raps about killing other black people, praising drug dealers, and in one song brags about drugging and raping women. Looking back at what transpired, I do have to acknowledge that I made a mistake, a couple of mistakes actually. The first was forgetting that Twitter isn't real life. It's a troll farm and algorithms designed to inflame. Exactly, like I'm explaining. Algorithms are brainwashing people across America in every state, and the people of the earth are not showing that they are awake to this reality. This is why some of you need to turn off the computer, turn off Facebook, turn off Twitter, because it's frying some of your brains. We'll come back to this in a future recording. What feels like 10,000 people assaulting you probably isn't. But like anyone who's been sucked into a social media beatdown, I felt that I couldn't log off without clarifying and coming back and doubling down again and again. I should have realized sooner that the whole exercise was pointless. Ironically, there I was, all concerned about the effects social media was having on other people, while failing to see the effects it was having on me. When I dove headfirst into the online conversation about sexual assault, I got plenty of backlash, but I was also swimming with the tide of the prevailing sentiment. I was helping to amplify something that was moving in the right direction. It was an entirely different experience to step out in front of a howling mob and say, hey, maybe we all need to stop and reflect on what we're doing and why we're doing it. Social media isn't built for any kind of nuanced, reasoned discussion. The mob is moving under its own power, and it won't stop until it drives itself over a cliff. Nothing you can say is going to be properly heard or understood. And let me pause. I hope that what I'm doing here on Substack is a few steps away from Facebook. And there is more engagement with my content on Substack, as Substack is not social media. So let us not give up on Substack and alternative websites outside of social media, because we must continue to use these devices and this technology and even AI and its transcription services to write books out of the content that we speak and to wake as many people up as possible before the coming cataclysms. Going back to the book. I also have to acknowledge that my timing wasn't the best. When someone is injured or in pain, there is a lot of great advice you can give them about what they should do next and how they can recover and get back on their feet. But you can't hit them with that right away. Whether it's good advice or bad, they just don't want to hear it. You need to give them time to sit and process their situation, absolutely, and be with their pain for a while. Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, you do realize that I'm sharing podcasts from 2020 and 2021 with you, and on another site for those that will message me and tell me that they disavow and renounce all forms of white supremacy, not just anti-white racism, but the other forms of racism as well. And for those that want to do that, they will have access to my other website, because we don't need people listening to that are not yet awake. But yes, I understand what he's saying. There is a time to share a message, and there's a time to wait before sharing that message. But I will say that there's a time in which you may have the inspiration to pick up a microphone and speak that truth, or to pick up a pen and write that book, or to type it into your computer, and it may be years until society is open enough, awake enough, less psychotic, right? You may have to wait until society calms down a notch until it has the eyes to see and ears to hear. That is why I did not upload in 2021, in 2022. It was not time yet for people to hear my voice. I came back when I felt the calling from God that it was time. That doesn't mean that I think people are awake right now, but I think that there are some people that are attempting to awaken spiritually. And because I have received some, very few, some supportive emails, less than 5. Less than 5. But it's because of those human beings and the future generations that I do what I do now. Because there are future generations, folks, that are going to be way more supportive of my message when I'm an old man, rather than the support that is there for me today in 2023. Mark my words, as my words will be read in 100 years, right? And I am going to will that into manifestation. And if you want to help me with that, you can make sure that the algorithm and AI will be powerless in reality to stop my words from being read and heard by others. Because there's many ways to duplicate somebody's message through the written word by writing books. You don't have to rely on computers. And in a day and age that may be coming in which the solar flares may eradicate computers, all that will be left, ladies and gentlemen, are books. Not our YouTube channels and not our podcasts, but books. So books must be published. And I'm not just talking about ebooks on Amazon. We're talking about physical books made and printed with paper. And hey, if somebody has the ability to carve into stone, right, so it can truly survive the fires of tomorrow, well, then do that as well. Then do that as well. We're on page 251. I'm such a type A, you can do this, let's tackle this, go, go, go kind of person that I can forget that sometimes, in fact, I even forgotten it at that moment in helping Rebecca recover from surgery. During those first months after the double mastectomy, in part because I was dealing with my own fears of losing her, I was going around being Mr. Positive. I was trying to force us up to jump ahead to the place where everything would be okay again, and I was doing it to the point where, to her, I felt like I wasn't recognizing the pain she was in. It pissed her off. After she called me on it, I realized my mistake, and I apologized. 2 weeks after George Floyd was killed, the nation was still in pain and in mourning. Everybody's emotions were still so raw, regardless of how I felt or what I believed. What I said was not the right thing to say in the moment. I should have let my tempers cool and wounds heal before I opened my mouth. I should have thought deliberately about the best way to articulate what I was trying to convey, rather than trying to fit it under Twitter's character count. I should have known that there was a better time, a better place, and a better medium to say what I wanted to say. Like maybe in a book. Exactly. So by the way, folks, I bet some of you are moved by this. Can you go over to YouTube and see anybody talking about this passage from Terry Crew's book? Or am I the only one? Am I the only one that's picking up on the power of his message and reading it to you in a podcast? Am I the only one? Has another human being, be they black, yellow, polka dot, Native American, Middle Eastern, has another human being cracked Terry Crew's book and read to you this powerful message? Yes or no? Feel free to let me know in the comments if you feel inclined to do so. Because I still believe the core of what I said is true. There was a story about Frederick Douglass, the famous abolitionist, that I always kept in mind. Douglass was traveling the country, giving his speeches, and the conductors of the railroad he was on wouldn't let him sit in the first-class cabin with his white companions. Now they made him sit in the back with the luggage. The white men traveling with him were outraged and insulted on his behalf. They wanted to lodge a protest, but Douglass refused, choosing to sit in the baggage car instead. Douglass knew who he was, and therefore he could sit anywhere and choose to be offended or not offended. On that day, getting to his speaking engagement on time was more important than being offended, so he chose to do the former. The soul that is within me, no man can degrade, Douglass said. I am not the one that is being degraded on account of this treatment, but those who are inflicting it upon me. Frederick Douglass understood power and agency in the same way that Viktor Frankl understood power and agency. They come from within. We can and should protest and call out injustice in the world, but we cannot control or stamp out every injustice that exists. What we can control, what we do have power over is ourselves. Just like I told you folks, don't support murder or don't murder. Don't support those that murder. And don't support those that murder. And on and on and on. Create as much distance between yourself and those that are supporting murder and harm and propaganda that leads to people being harmed or being killed. Does this make sense? Do you need further clarification? We can always choose what we say and how we respond. Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X and Fannie Lou Hamar and Shirley Chisholm understood that too. Those men and women were able to endure everything from segregated rail cars to prison cells because nothing the world threw at them could dim the light they carried inside themselves. That is true power. The irony of the whole situation is that I failed to heed the lesson myself. When I sent my first tweet, I was trying to say, in essence, that all God's children needed to love one another, and that black people in the heated moment needed to listen to our better angels instead of succumbing to our worst selves. That's really all I wanted to say, but I didn't say that. I spoke too loudly and too soon, and I let myself get dragged into a Twitter fight instead. I didn't wield the power of my voice as thoughtfully and judiciously as I should have. As for the people who attacked my family and called me a clown and a race traitor and a coon, I wonder if they have the humility to admit the same. The Terry Crews Black Supremacy social media maelstrom lasted about 2.5 news cycles, which was 2.5 more than it deserved. Fox News made a heyday out of it for a while. Don Lemon had me back on CNN, this time to drag me instead of celebrating me, and that wasn't great. And most of us really don't like this Don Lemon character. I don't either. Terry Crews should have known better, but that's okay. I'm sure Terry Crews is imperfect. And he didn't once mention genocide in the Middle East. And so even though he's talking a lot of amazing things that are important, he is a powerful black speaker and an intellectual, should recognize the hardcore racism and genocides that are taking place to other non-white people around the world. But, we can only hope. Maybe send him a Facebook message. Tell him Alex Ansary says hello. We all know he's on Twitter and Facebook. As by the time it was done, still feeling defensive and misunderstood, I sent out my final thoughts on the matter. Are all white people bad? No. Are all black people good? No. Knowing this reality, I stand on my decision to unite with good people, no matter the race, creed, or ideology. Given the number of threats against the decision, I also decide to die on this hill. And I'm going to add something to that. So I have pushed back against white supremacy, but white people are my primary supporters. It's not that I created content just for white supremacy or white people, right? White people, people of my mother's bloodline. While I push back against white supremacy and Nazism, it would be a fool that thinks my criticism of these extremist ideologies would be anti-white. Those are people that want to shut me up from waking up white people and helping those white audience members spiritually grow. So there's a lot of sabotage, folks, that I faced. There's ways in which I was punished by individuals, ways in which I was harmed online, because of the light within my heart, trying to help those of you evolve. So I appreciate those of you that have donated over the years. I don't know if you are here now. There's many people that are choosing to stay on YouTube because they're addicted to that social media video streaming site. And it is an unfortunate situation that they refuse to listen to a Substack podcast. That should tell you something about the nature of consciousness today, when there's only a few people listening to these podcasts. And so I have always been grateful for my white audience. But in all honesty, there's no reason why there is not a significant number of other ethnic people listening to these broadcasts. Because these broadcasts are for everyone. And so even though I'm talking about the dangers of black supremacy, Nazism, others have already talked about Islamic radicalism, that's already covered. The others are not covered. And so if people want to save their soul, speaking spiritually now, from the demiurge of this world, you do need to repent of these dark, racist attitudes that are in some cases being beamed into our minds, maybe, through electronic means and or archonic demonic attack, right? If you really want to talk about the principalities of darkness that we wrestle against, not just the flesh and blood, we really do need to talk about anti-Themism and all the different racism that is taking place on the internet, custom tailored towards different groups. And so the anti-white racism that is being allowed on aspects of social media is there to manipulate people towards the dark side, to blame good white people for the actions of some unconscious white people. So if you really want to stand against anti-white racism and propaganda, then you really, really need to understand what the algorithm is doing, and you need to speak out about it. You need to speak out as a good white person that is not taken over by racism as to what the algorithm is doing. And so those people that are actually knowingly spreading hate, and you know it, they're being boosted by the algorithm because those that control the algorithm are embedded in Satan's kingdom. They're setting white people up for a trap down the line when we're at war with Russia and China. And so all this anti-white sentiment is going to build and build and build until it is used against innocent white people that didn't do jack shit to people of color, right? Do you understand me? I stand against the white slavery that may be coming in the future. And I do not have brothers and sisters in the truth movement standing with me arm by arm that are content creators. There are those of you that may be listeners and consumers. I appreciate that. But as far as significant voices in the alternative media that have their own audiences, they have their own agenda. And that is very, very unfortunate. Going back to the book. I believe that every black life should not be protected but celebrated. But I want no part of any movement fueled by the impotent rage of victimhood. I want no part of any movement that doesn't begin with unity and reconciliation, because that is the only way for black lives in this country to truly flourish. The only future that allows our children to be whomever they choose it to be, the future in which black children and white America, or black America and white America, reconcile and recognize that their fates are intertwined as one. I would argue that many, if not most people, agree with that premises. But the loudest voices in the room insist otherwise, and they're dragging us all in the wrong direction. It looks like this completes this section. And so I'm going to tell you a few things, and then we'll close. I remember going to a certain property in southwest Colorado, just outside of Durango by an hour, where I used to live on the hill and off-grid with the hill people. And I needed to get a bag of marijuana, an ounce of marijuana. So I tried to get it back in those days for $75 or $100. And it's amazing the shady people that you will meet in your adventures trying to get weed. And so I come to one property, and this area was pretty much dominated by white supremacy. And here they had a black farmer who was associated with these individuals. And so I think that because he's black, that I can talk to him about what I think is really going on with the algorithms, how a lot of these people are being accused of things. A lot of these immigrants are being accused of things that they're not actually guilty of. And so I explained to him what these algorithms are doing. And he basically said, I don't agree with that. I don't believe that. And he walked away. So despite the fact that black people in this country have suffered from propaganda to a degree, and some of their own people have been accused of doing certain things that have resulted in some of them being shot when they are unarmed, when it comes to explaining to some of them that the things that have happened to them are actually happening to other demographics and they should care about other people other than just themselves, right? Because he had been already brainwashed by Facebook, because he had already been brainwashed by YouTube, because he had already been brainwashed by Twitter and the people in his inner circle, the information that I had for him, which he should have applied to his awareness, he chose to reject, and he was black. So it's like, here are people that have actually experienced racism, they've actually experienced discrimination, and yet when it happens to others, they don't want to say a thing about what is taking place. And yet they think they're conscious. Some of these folks think that they're hippies. They sit there with their marijuana and they sit there with their supposed New Age teachings and people that they follow online, and they talk about love and light. But a lot of these so-called spiritual communities that are out there are only comfortable with a few black people and maybe somebody else that may be Latino if they're light-skinned. When it comes to other ethnicities, many of these so-called love and light conscious New Agers, so-called love and light leftists and liberals, are really not comfortable with people's, his ancestries, come from other lands in which their countries are bombing back to the Stone Age. They don't have compassion, and they're not spiritual. Nor are these churches spiritual when they segregate by race. Like where I live, you go to these churches and it's a different race or ethnicity in these churches. You don't see a mix of human beings speaking out against racism and Satan's kingdom in these churches locally. They literally think it's normal to segregate based on the color of your skin. And when you do come across some of these churches in which they have blacks and whites and Latinos, they never speak against racism. They just read from the Bible and they just say the lawlessness, the Bible says this, but they don't speak about what's really happening in today's society. So as I said, when the cities were burning, but not all of them, but cities like Portland, that has a lot of bad people that moved there in recent years. Not all. There's one person that appears to be in Portland that's listening to these podcasts. Welcome, brother. Glad that somebody from Portland, Oregon is listening to this. If only the thousands and thousands of people that were in my cable access audience remembered my name and were listening to this, right? But unless you're constantly going to be creating content for people, they will just forget about you unless you're tap dancing in front of them, on TV in front of them, entertaining their ass, right? But if you go away or you become homeless or you move across the country, so few of these humans will have the brain cells functioning properly to think, I wonder what Alex Ansary is doing. Let me check his Facebook. Let me check his Twitter. Let me check his YouTube. Let me check his website. It's like they act like they don't have a brain. It's like a song and dance from Wizard of Oz. You know, if only I had a brain. Dun, 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 dun. And so there is no excuse for people to get so wild and so emotional that they start creating destruction in places in which they should be only protesting peacefully. Instead of myself get involved with angry protests and things of that nature, I chose to pick up a microphone knowing that nobody was really receptive to what I had to say on either the left or the right. And I took that emotion that I felt and that energy that was coming in from the solar flare on May 29th, 2020 that preceded the George Floyd protests, and the energy from Comet Neowise, which I talked about at the time on my Patreon for like the 15 people that were there, right? YouTube channel of 16,000 people. How many people were on my Patreon? 15 friggin' people with maybe one person commenting. Thank you, Eric, right? Hope you're doing well out there, Eric. So there should be no surprise why I pulled back from the internet, why I pulled my Patreon, why I pulled my VHX.TV page, and I chose to record my voice into the microphone in these long private discourses, and I vowed to never ever release those recordings on my main platform, and to only release those recordings when the day felt right, and the day feels right. So if you're on the level and you are against all forms of racism, right, not just anti-white racism, and you know, right, that Islamophobia has been used against non-Muslims who believe in Christ, who are Americans, if you are willing to admit that, Send me a private message outside the comment sections, right? There's multiple ways to do that. There's multiple ways to do that. And I'm on Facebook, right? And I'm on Twitter, right? If you want that information and you renounce all forms of racism and you want this deep level information, right? Let me know. I appreciate you listening. The name of the book, which you can get for yourself, is Tough: My Journey to True Power by Terry Crews. And in this post on Substack, I am going to be adding other videos by Terry Crews that were uploaded to YouTube. I'm Alex Ansary, reminding you the path to the ultimate truth and place of power still lies within. God bless you all.